A rancher adopted a lost Apache girl, then discovered her mother was a beautiful widow. The sun had barely begun to rise over the wide, dusty plains when John Carter stepped out of his small wooden cabin. The morning air was cool, carrying the smell of wet earth and dry grass, a scent that always reminded him of home. John was a rancher, born and raised on this land. His days were long and hard, filled with the endless care of his cattle and the maintenance of fences that stretched as far as the eye could see. He liked it that way. There was something comforting in the rhythm of work, the simple honesty of the land, and the quiet of the wide open sky. That morning, like every other, John saddled up his horse, a sturdy brown mare named Daisy, and rode along the edges of his property. He checked fences, looked for signs of trouble with the herd, and made sure the water troughs were full. Life was simple, predictable, and safe, or so he thought. As he guided Daisy along a narrow path near the farthest corner of his land, he thought he heard something unusual. At first he was sure it was the wind rustling through the dry brush. But then he heard it again, a faint, high-pitched sound that made him pause. It was a cry, a child's cry. John's heart skipped a beat. He was not used to hearing such sounds out here, where the only noises were the lowing of cows, the calls of birds, and the occasional rustle of coyotes in the distance. The cry was soft but urgent, full of fear and confusion. Without thinking, John urged Daisy forward, following the sound through the tall grass and scattered mesquite trees. The cries led him to a small, narrow ravine, where the shadows were long and the ground was uneven. And there, huddled under a low bush, was a little girl. She looked no older than 7, with dark hair tangled around her small face and wide, frightened eyes that shone with tears. Her clothes were worn and dusty, and she clutched a small, frayed doll tightly to her chest, as if it were the only thing keeping her safe. John dismounted quickly, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, holding out his hands. "It's okay. You're safe now." The girl flinched, backing away slightly, but she did not run. There was something in John's voice, steady and kind, that seemed to calm her fears, if only a little. Slowly, she peeked out from under the bush, her eyes scanning him carefully. There was a long moment of silence. John could see the confusion and fear written all over her face. He could also see a glimmer of hope, tiny but persistent, as if she was deciding whether to trust him. "My name is John," he said, kneeling down so he was closer to her level.
"I take care of this land. You're not alone anymore."
"Do you want to come with me?" The girl hesitated. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. Her movements were slow, cautious, as she rose to her feet. She did not speak, but John could sense her relief. Carefully, he reached out and took her small hand in his. It was warm, but trembling. He led her to Daisy, who stood quietly, sensing that this was no ordinary encounter. John helped the girl climb onto the horse, placing her gently behind him so she could ride safely. She held on tightly, burying her face against his back as they rode back to the ranch. By the time they arrived, the sun had risen fully, casting a golden glow over the fields. The ranch looked peaceful, with cattle grazing lazily and birds flitting from fence post to fence post. But John knew that this day, like no other, would change his life forever. He guided Daisy into the corral and helped the girl down. She was trembling slightly, and John could see that she was exhausted, probably from walking or perhaps running. For hours, he led her into the cabin where a warm fire was already crackling. The scent of fresh bread and strong coffee filled the air, but John knew it was not the smells that would comfort her. It was the safety, the shelter, the feeling that for the first time in a long while she was not alone. He offered her a blanket and a bowl of warm porridge. She stared at it for a moment, unsure, before slowly taking the spoon and tasting it. Her eyes widened slightly, and she nodded, a small sign of trust. John smiled, keeping his tone gentle. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl hesitated. "Sky," she whispered finally. "Little Sky, little Sky," John repeated, softly committing the name to memory. It was a fitting name, he thought, for someone who had wandered alone under the wide sky and now had a chance to belong somewhere. Little Sky ate slowly, her hands trembling as she held the spoon. John spoke to her quietly, telling her about the ranch, the animals, and the people who worked there. He told her that she could rest as long as she needed, that she was safe, and that he would take care of her. After the meal, he showed her around the ranch, pointing out the cows, the horses, and even the barn where the chickens clucked and pecked at the ground. Little Sky watched everything with wide, curious eyes. She was cautious, but also fascinated by this new world, so different from the one she had wandered through alone. As the day went on, John began to learn more about her. She did not speak much, but through small gestures and shy glances, he understood that she had been alone for a long time. She had no memory of where her family might be, only the vague image of a stormy day and a frightened journey through the desert. John felt a pang of sadness. It was hard to imagine what she must have gone through, yet he was grateful to have found her before something worse could happen. The evening came, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. John built a small fire outside, and Little Sky sat beside him, wrapped in a blanket. They watched the stars begin to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. For the first time since she had been lost, Little Sky felt a sense of peace. She leaned against John slightly, a silent acknowledgement that she trusted him, at least for now. John felt something shift in his heart. He had always lived a simple life focused on work and routine, but the sight of this little girl, lost and alone, filled him with a deep sense of responsibility. He knew that taking her in would not be easy. There would be challenges, questions, and perhaps even opposition from others, but he also knew that he could not turn away. Not when she needed someone, anyone, to care for her. That night, as he lay in bed in his small cabin, John thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought Little Sky to him. He thought about the long road ahead and the unknown challenges they would face together. But he also felt a quiet hope, a belief that sometimes life gives us unexpected gifts, gifts that come wrapped in the form of a child with wide, curious eyes and a brave heart. By the time the first light of dawn crept into the cabin the next morning, Little Sky was already awake, watching John as he prepared breakfast. She had eaten, slept, and perhaps for the first time, begun to feel that she had a place where she belonged. And John, looking at her, realized that this little girl, lost and alone in the desert, had already begun to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. It was the beginning of something new, a story of trust, care, and the unexpected ways in which life can bring people together. And though neither of them knew what the future held, they both understood one simple truth, that in the vast, endless land of the Southwest, they had found each other, and that was enough to start. The days that followed Little Sky's arrival at the ranch were filled with small, quiet routines. John Carter had always valued order and hard work, and now he found himself carefully arranging his life to include this fragile little girl who had appeared out of nowhere. He began calling her Little Sky every morning, and she gradually started responding to the name. At first she was shy, barely speaking more than a few words, but over time her soft voice began to fill the quiet spaces of the ranch. John made a small room ready for her in the corner of his cabin. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy, with a bed, a wooden chest for her few belongings, and a window that looked out over the open plains. Little Sky liked to sit on the windowsill and watch the horses grazing in the early morning light. She would press her tiny hands against the glass and smile softly, as if she could feel the freedom of the land even from inside. Every morning, John would take her outside to help with small chores. It started with simple tasks, gathering eggs from the chicken coop, feeding the goats, and carrying hay to the barn. At first, Little Sky moved cautiously, afraid of the animal's size and sudden movements. John stayed close, guiding her gently and praising her when she tried something new. Slowly, her fear turned into fascination. She laughed at the chickens pecking at the ground, marveled at the goats leaping onto low wooden platforms, and carefully patted the horses as they nuzzled her tiny hands. School was another challenge. The nearest town was miles away, and John knew Little Sky needed more than just ranch chores. So he set up a small corner of the cabin as a classroom. He had some old books, notebooks, and pencils, and he spent his mornings teaching her to read and write. At first it was slow going. Little Sky had gaps in her knowledge because of the years she had wandered alone, but she was intelligent and curious. She asked endless questions about the world, about the sky, about the plants and animals she saw every day. John found himself admiring her curiosity. It reminded him of the same questions he had asked as a boy, long ago, when life seemed full of possibilities. He realized that although Little Sky had been through much more than any child should have, her spirit had remained bright and unbroken. Evenings were spent in quiet companionship. They would sit by the fire, John reading aloud from one of his old adventure books, and Little Sky listening with wide eyes. Sometimes she would fall asleep mid-sentence, her head leaning against his shoulder. Other times she would ask him to tell stories about the ranch, about the time he had to rescue a cow stuck in the mud, or the day the storm swept through the valley. John didn't mind repeating the stories. He enjoyed her fascination, her laughter, and the way she would ask him endless why questions that kept him thinking. But life on the ranch was not just about work and learning. It was about trust, safety, and love. John made sure Little Sky knew she had a place where she belonged. He never forced her to talk about the past, understanding that some memories might be painful. Instead, he let her open up at her own pace. And slowly she began to share small details. A memory of a stormy night, a soft lullaby her mother had sung, a feeling of being lost in a desert that seemed endless. John listened quietly, offering comfort and reassurance without judgment. The ranch itself became a playground and a sanctuary for Little Sky. She loved climbing the hills to watch the sunset, her tiny figure outlined against the orange sky. She loved following John as he rode through the fields, feeling the wind rush past her face. She began naming the animals, giving each one a personality in her own quiet way. The cows became gentle giants, the horses daring adventurers, and even the chickens were mischievous little friends. Neighbors from nearby ranches were curious about the little Apache girl living with John Carter. Some were kind and welcoming, offering help or small gifts of clothes and food. Others were skeptical, unsure how a young child had come to be on John's property. John, however, never explained much, only saying that he had found her lost and that she needed a home. Over time, most neighbors came to accept Little Sky as part of the ranch family, especially when they saw how she thrived under John's care. Despite the peace and routine, John never stopped thinking about Little Sky's family. He sent letters to nearby towns asking if anyone had lost a child, and visited town after town discreetly inquiring. But no one answered. The mystery of her past remained, and John worried quietly that one day someone might appear, someone claiming her as their own. He hoped that day would come only when it was safe, when the right people appeared, not before. One afternoon, as they were walking along the riverbank, Little Sky stopped and stared at the water. She tossed small stones into the river, watching the ripples spread outward. John noticed a faraway look in her eyes. "Do you miss them?" he asked gently, kneeling beside her. Little Sky nodded slowly. "I don't know where they are," she whispered. "I don't even know if they are looking for me." John put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You are not alone anymore," he said softly. "I will always be here. And someday, maybe we will find the people you are looking for. Until then, you have a home, and you are safe." The little girl leaned against him, and for a moment the world outside seemed to disappear. There was only the sound of the river, the wind in the trees, and the quiet promise that she was no longer lost. As the months passed, Little Sky's confidence grew. She learned to ride the horses alone, to care for the animals, and to navigate the ranch with ease. She laughed more freely now, a bright sound that echoed across the plains. John marveled at her resilience and determination. She had come to him frightened and fragile, but she was slowly becoming strong, capable, and independent. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, John realized that their bond had grown deeper than he had ever expected. Little Sky looked at him with trust and affection, and he knew that this little girl had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. He had always lived a quiet, solitary life focused on work and routine, but now his days were filled with joy, responsibility, and a new kind of love. a love that was gentle, protective, and unconditional. Yet, even in these peaceful moments, John could not ignore the lingering questions. Who had Little Sky's family been? Where had she come from? Why had she been alone in the desert? He knew that answers might never come, but he also knew that for now the most important thing was the present, giving her a safe, happy life and showing her that love could be found even in the most unexpected places. And so, life on the ranch continued. Each day brought new lessons, new adventures, and new moments of connection. John taught Little Sky about the land, the animals, and the simple joys of ranch life. She taught him about hope, resilience, and the importance of patience and trust. Together, they built a small world filled with care, laughter, and understanding. Little Sky no longer felt like a lost child wandering the desert. She felt like she belonged, she felt safe, and most importantly, she felt loved. And John Carter, who had once thought his life was complete with only the land and animals, realized that he had been given the greatest gift of all, the chance to be a father to a little girl who had walked into his life like a whisper on the wind and stayed like sunlight in his heart. Life on the ranch had settled into a comforting rhythm, yet John Carter often found himself thinking about the unanswered questions surrounding Little Sky. He had grown to love her as a daughter, and though the ranch was filled with laughter, learning, and work, there was always a quiet curiosity in him. Who had this little girl been before she came into his life? Where had she wandered? And, perhaps most importantly, was her family still out there somewhere, waiting for her? Little Sky, for her part, had begun to feel a sense of peace. She no longer trembled at the sight of new animals or flinched at sudden noises. She rode the horses confidently, helped feed the cows, and even learned to milk the goats under John's patient guidance. But despite her growing strength, there were moments when her mind wandered to the past. She would sometimes pause mid-task, gaze at the distant hills, and whisper a single word: "Mother."
One sunny afternoon, John decided to take Little Sky into town.
It was a small town, not far from the ranch, but still bustling with people, markets, and the occasional traveling merchant. Little Sky had never been to a place like this, and she clutched John's hand tightly as they walked along the dusty streets. The sounds, the colors, the smells, all of it was new, exciting, and slightly overwhelming. As they wandered past the market stalls, a merchant with a friendly face called out to John,
Morning, John. How's the ranch?
"And who's this little one?" "This is Little Sky," John said, smiling. "She is new to the ranch." The merchant's eyes widened as he looked at her, and he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "That girl, she reminds me of someone. Years ago I met a woman not far from here, a widow. She had lost a child, and I remember thinking how brave she was. It was a sad story, but I never forgot her. I wonder if there could be a connection." John's heart skipped a beat. He listened carefully as the merchant described the widow, a woman named Elena, graceful, kind, and well known in the region for her quiet strength. The merchant explained that she lived on the outskirts of town, in a small house surrounded by wildflowers and trees. John's mind raced. Could it be possible that Elena was Little Sky's mother? The resemblance between the two, the dark hair, the shape of the eyes, the gentle way they both moved, had always struck him, but he had dismissed it as coincidence. Now, hearing this story from someone who had known the woman personally, he could no longer ignore the possibility. Over the next few days, John watched Little Sky carefully. There were small habits, tiny gestures, that reminded him of something familiar yet unspoken. The way she tilted her head when she listened, the quiet determination in her eyes, the subtle expressions of curiosity and wonder. They all reminded him of the description of Elena. It was as if some invisible thread connected mother and daughter, a thread he had only just begun to notice. He knew he had to be careful. Little Sky had grown attached to him, and he had no intention of causing confusion or fear. Yet he also knew that if Elena was truly her mother, Little Sky had a right to know. He decided to gather information slowly, to approach the situation with patience and thoughtfulness. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink, John took little Sky to a quiet hill overlooking the town. They sat together in silence for a while, watching the smoke rise from chimneys and the lights begin to twinkle. "You know," John said gently, "sometimes people in the world are connected in ways we don't understand. We meet someone, and even if we don't know them, they might be part of our story in some way." Little Sky tilted her head, curious. "Do you think my mother is out there somewhere?" she asked softly. John hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know for sure," he said. "But sometimes the world gives us signs. Sometimes people who belong together find each other again, even after many years." The little girl was silent, watching the horizon. For a moment, John thought he saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. He realized that little Sky was beginning to wonder about her past, just as he was. And he knew that one day the truth might reveal itself. A few days later, John decided to make a discreet visit to the town. He asked subtle questions, spoke to neighbors, and pieced together what he could about Elena. He learned that Elena had been a widow for several years, living quietly and keeping to herself. She was respected by those who knew her, admired for her strength and grace in the face of loss. Most importantly, she had lost a child under mysterious circumstances, a child she had searched for tirelessly. John felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. He knew he had to be careful. The discovery of Elena's identity could change everything. Little Sky's world, which had grown stable and safe, could be shaken. But he also knew that finding her mother could bring answers, closure, and perhaps even joy. Back at the ranch, Little Sky noticed that John seemed quieter, thoughtful in a way she had not seen before. She asked him about it, and he smiled gently, saying only that he was thinking about the world and the people in it. She accepted his answer, sensing that there was more than he could say, but trusting him nonetheless. Days turned into weeks, and John continued his quiet investigation. He visited the outskirts of town, observing Elena's house from a distance. He saw a woman tending to her garden, moving with a calm, deliberate grace. There was something about her posture, the way she moved her hands, the tilt of her head, that reminded him of Little Sky. It was a connection he could not ignore. One afternoon, while Little Sky played near the edge of the ranch, John's mind wandered to the possibilities. He imagined the moment when mother and daughter might finally meet, the emotions that would flood both of them, and the adjustments they would have to make. He felt a deep sense of responsibility to guide this carefully, to protect Little Sky from confusion and hurt, while also honoring the bond she might have with her mother. John knew that building trust and preparing for this reunion was essential. He began speaking to Little Sky more about family, not directly about Elena, but about love, connection, and hope. He told her stories of families who were separated and found each other again, emphasizing the importance of patience and understanding. Little Sky listened intently, absorbing the lessons with a quiet wisdom that amazed John. One evening, as they watched the stars appear, John held Little Sky's small hand in his. "Someday," he said softly, "we may find the people who belong to you, and when we do, you'll know they care about you. But no matter what happens, I will always be here for you. Always." Little Sky looked up at him, her dark eyes filled with trust. She squeezed his hand gently, as if acknowledging the promise. John felt a warmth in his chest, a reassurance that, whatever the future held, they were ready to face it together. The next morning, a letter arrived in town, delivered by a traveling merchant. John read it carefully, his pulse quickening. It was from someone who had known Elena years ago, confirming that she had indeed lost a child and had been searching tirelessly. The letter included directions to her home and a description that matched everything John had observed. He knew the moment of truth was approaching. He would have to introduce Little Sky to her mother, to explain the year she had been lost, and to guide both of them through what might be an overwhelming emotional experience. He felt a mixture of excitement, hope, and nervousness. Back at the ranch, he shared the news carefully with Little Sky. "There is someone I think you might know," he said gently. Someone very special who might be your mother. Would you like to meet her?" Little Sky's eyes widened. She did not speak at first, but her small hand squeezed his. She nodded slowly, a mixture of curiosity, hope, and trepidation in her expression. John smiled, knowing that this was the first step toward answers they had both been waiting for. And so, life on the ranch continued, but with a new sense of purpose. John prepared for the meeting, ensuring that Little Sky felt safe and supported. The bond they had built over months of trust, learning, and care would guide them through the next chapter, one that promised discovery, reunion, and perhaps a deep, unexpected joy. As the sun set over the wide plains, casting long shadows and bathing the land in gold, John felt a quiet excitement. Something significant was about to happen, something that would change their lives forever. And although he could not predict exactly how it would unfold, he knew one thing for certain: love, patience, and care would guide them through. And the connection between mother and daughter, even after years apart, might be closer than they had ever imagined. The morning sun stretched its golden fingers across the plains as John Carter prepared for the most important day of his life as a father figure. He could feel a quiet nervousness in his chest, a mixture of anticipation and hope. Today, Little Sky would meet the woman he believed to be her mother. The thought had been on his mind for weeks, and now the moment had finally arrived. Little Sky, for her part, seemed unusually quiet that morning. She helped John with the morning chores, carrying water and feeding the animals, but her usual cheerful chatter was absent. Instead, she moved thoughtfully, glancing at the horizon as if sensing that something significant awaited her. John noticed her silence but said nothing, letting her process her feelings in her own time. By late morning, they set out for the outskirts of town. John had walked the route several times before, observing Elena's home from a respectful distance, making sure he knew exactly how to approach. The house was modest but beautiful, surrounded by a small garden where wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze. It was a place that seemed peaceful, almost timeless, the perfect backdrop for a reunion that had been years in the making. Little Sky held John's hand tightly as they approached the gate. Her small fingers gripped his with both excitement and uncertainty. "Are you sure she will like me?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. John knelt down and looked into her eyes. "She's your mother," he said gently. "Of course she will like you. She has been looking for you for a long time, and now you are here. That is all that matters." They stepped through the garden path, the flowers brushing against Little Sky's tiny hands as she walked. At the door, John knocked gently, and within moments it swung open. There stood Elena, a woman whose beauty was quiet but undeniable. Her dark hair framed a face marked by kindness, strength, and a lingering sadness that melted instantly when her eyes fell on Little Sky. The little girl froze, staring at Elena with wide eyes. Elena's breath caught, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. She recognized the small face immediately, the same dark eyes she had imagined every night for years. "Little Sky?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling. The child's lips parted, unsure what to say. Then, with a tentative step forward, she ran into Elena's arms. The embrace was immediate and instinctive, a connection that no words could describe. Elena held her daughter tightly, feeling the warmth of her small body, the reality of her presence. Tears streamed down Elena's cheeks as she whispered, "I thought I had lost you forever." He had hoped for this moment, worked toward it carefully, but seeing it unfold was beyond anything he had imagined. He felt a mixture of joy and quiet sadness, knowing that while he had been Little Sky's guardian, her mother had always been searching for her. And now, that search had finally ended. Little Sky pulled back slightly, looking up at Elena with a mixture of curiosity and recognition. Are you really my mother?" she asked softly. Elena smiled through her tears. "Yes, my little one. I am your mother. I have missed you every day." She knelt down so they were at the same height, brushing a stray lock of hair from Little Sky's face. "You are here now, and I will never let you go again." The reunion was slow, careful, and full of emotion. Little Sky clung to her mother, exploring the reality of her presence, while Elena whispered stories, memories, and promises. She told Little Sky about the days she had spent searching, about the nights she had cried quietly in her small house, hoping against hope that her child was alive. She spoke gently, never overwhelming Little Sky, allowing the little girl to absorb the truth at her own pace. John remained a quiet presence, standing slightly back, watching and listening. He had been prepared for this day, but seeing it in person was more profound than he had imagined. He felt no jealousy or loss, only a deep sense of fulfillment. He had given Little Sky safety, love, and guidance, and now she was reconnecting with the woman who had brought her into the world. The afternoon passed with quiet conversation and tentative smiles. Little Sky began to speak more, asking questions about her early life, about her mother's home, and about the flowers in the garden. Elena answered patiently, encouraging curiosity while keeping her explanation simple and comforting. She pointed to the wildflowers and told Little Sky about how she had planted each one, imagining the day her child would return to see them bloom. John joined in gently, sharing memories of the time they had spent together on the ranch. He told stories about the horses, the cows, and the little adventures they had experienced. Little Sky listened with wide eyes, laughing at some parts and nodding thoughtfully at others. The day was full of learning, laughter, and discovery. A beautiful blend of past and present, of reunion and new beginnings. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting a warm glow over the garden, John knew it was time to give mother and daughter a private moment. He stepped back, allowing them to walk together among the flowers, holding hands, talking softly. Little Sky's laughter floated in the air, mingling with the gentle breeze. Elena's face was radiant with joy and relief. John remained on the porch for a while, watching the two of them. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that he had done everything he could to guide Little Sky safely to this moment. He realized that love could take many forms, sometimes as a protector, sometimes as a teacher, sometimes as a parent. Today it had brought a mother and child together, and he had been honored to play a part in it. When evening finally came, Elena invited John and Little Sky inside for a small meal. They sat together at a simple wooden table, sharing bread, soup, and quiet conversation. The room was filled with warmth and laughter, a gentle hum of life renewed. Little Sky talked freely now, sharing stories of the ranch, of the animals, and of her adventures with John. Elena listened with fascination, marveling at her daughter's courage and spirit. John felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that Little Sky's life had changed forever, but he also knew that his role remained important. He would continue to guide her, support her, and be there for her, just as he always had. The reunion did not mean his presence was no longer needed. It meant their family had grown, that love had expanded to include all of them. Later, as the stars appeared in the clear night sky, John, Little Sky, and Elena stepped outside. They stood together, looking up at the vast expanse of the universe. Little Sky leaned against her mother, and John rested a hand on her shoulder. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but for the first time it felt like home, not just for John, not just for Little Sky, but for all three of them. The night was calm, filled with quiet conversations and shared dreams. Little Sky spoke of the future she hoped for, of the animals she wanted to care for, and the adventures she wished to have. Elena listened with pride and encouragement, promising to be by her side every step of the way. John smiled, knowing that the bonds they had formed were strong and enduring. As they prepared to return to the ranch, Aylin turned to John. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for finding her, for keeping her safe, and for giving her love when she needed it most." John shook his head gently. "No, thank you," he replied. "I was lucky to have her in my life. She changed me as much as I changed her." Little Sky squeezed John's hand and whispered, "I love you too."
In that moment, John felt a deep, unshakable joy.
He had witnessed something extraordinary, the reunion of a mother and her lost child, the healing of years of longing, and the beginning of a life filled with love and hope. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every step. And as they rode back to the ranch, little Sky nestled between her mother and John. The desert landscape stretching out before them, John knew that life had given them a rare and precious gift, the chance to be together, to heal, and to love without reservation. The reunion had ended, but a new chapter had begun. A chapter filled with laughter, learning, and shared moments that would shape their lives forever. And in the quiet glow of the setting sun, all three of them understood a simple truth. Family was not only defined by blood, but by love, trust, and the courage to care for one another. Life on the ranch had changed in ways that John Carter had never imagined. The arrival of little Sky had already brought joy and energy into his quiet days, but the reunion with Elena added a new dimension to their world. Together, the three of them formed a family, not just in the traditional sense, but in a way that was chosen, nurtured, and deeply felt. The morning after the reunion, the ranch was alive with activity. Little Sky woke up early, as she always did, but this time she ran to her mother's room first. Elena had spent the night in the cabin to be near her daughter, and little Sky bounded inside, her small feet pattering against the wooden floor. "Good morning, Mama!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around Elena. Elena hugged her tightly, smiling through her tears.
Good morning, my little one.
"Did you sleep well?"
Yes, I dreamed about the horses, little Sky said excitedly, bouncing on her toes.
John, watching from the doorway, felt a warm sense of satisfaction. He had always known that the ranch and its simple life could teach valuable lessons, but seeing little Sky share that world with her mother brought him a deeper understanding of love, connection, and family. Breakfast that morning was a lively affair. John cooked eggs and bread while Elena helped little Sky set the table. The little girl chattered endlessly about the animals on the ranch, the river, and the lessons she had learned over the past few months. Elena listened intently, laughing and asking questions, absorbing every detail about the life her daughter had been living with John. After breakfast, they stepped outside to the wide-open fields. Little Sky led the way, eager to show her mother everything. She introduced Elena to the horses, naming each one, and demonstrated how she had learned to feed the goats and gather eggs. Elena followed closely, helping where she could and marveling at how capable her daughter had become. John rode alongside them, guiding the horses and offering encouragement.
She's learned everything quickly, he said quietly to Elena.
"She's smart, brave, and curious. She reminds me of you." Elena smiled, touched by John's words. "I see that now. I can see why she has thrived here. You gave her more than just safety. You gave her love, patience, and a home. And for that, I am forever grateful." Over the next few days, they began to adjust to their new life together. Elena moved into a small house near the ranch, keeping some of her own belongings but also creating a space for little Sky to feel at home. The little girl split her time between her mother and John, learning from both, laughing with both, and growing in ways that were visible each day. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, little Sky asked her mother, "Mama, can I plant flowers here too?" "Of course, my dear," Elena replied, smiling. "We can plant as many as you like." Little Sky carefully chose seeds, digging small holes and placing each one in the soil. John watched, impressed by her dedication and care. "You've got a green thumb," he said, ruffling her hair. "And so does she," Elena added, looking at John with gratitude. "Thank you for teaching her so many things." But now those routines were shared among three people. They fed the animals together, repaired fences, and tended to the garden. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, telling stories, sharing dreams, and planning for the future. Little Sky loved listening to both of them, learning about the past through her mother's stories and about the present through John's tales of the ranch. The bond between John and Elena grew as well. They shared responsibilities, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. They learned to communicate without conflict, respecting each other's ways while working toward the same goal, providing little Sky with a loving, secure, and joyful life. John had always been independent and self-reliant, but now he found joy in partnership, understanding that life could be richer when shared. Little Sky thrived in this environment. Her confidence grew, Her curiosity expanded, and her laughter became a constant presence on the ranch. She began to share her feelings more openly, asking questions about her mother's past, about the world beyond the ranch, and about her own dreams. Elena answered with patience, while John offered guidance and encouragement, creating a balance that nurtured both trust and independence. One sunny afternoon, the three of them took a long ride across the plains. Little Sky rode between her mother and John, laughing as the wind whipped through her hair. They crossed rivers, climbed small hills, and stopped to rest under the shade of a lone tree. The world seemed endless, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, Little Sky felt truly free. During a quiet moment, Elena looked at John and said, "I can't thank you enough for what you've done. You didn't just protect her. You gave her a childhood full of hope and love. That is something I can never repay." John shook his head, smiling. "You don't have to. Seeing her happy, seeing her safe, that's more than enough. And now, we all have a chance to be a family in our own way." As the days turned into weeks, their new life continued to settle into a harmonious rhythm. They celebrated small victories together. Little Sky learning a new skill, a calf being born, the garden blooming in colors of red, yellow, and purple. Each event became an opportunity for bonding, laughter, and teaching important lessons about life, responsibility, and love. Evenings were spent under the stars. They would sit together on the porch, looking out over the wide plains. Little Sky would point to constellations, telling stories she had made up, while John and Elena listened and added their own tales. The desert night, once lonely and vast, now felt intimate and warm. John often reflected on how far they had come. He had started as a solitary rancher, focused solely on his work and the land. Then came Little Sky, lost and alone, who had brought him laughter, responsibility, and a heart full of care. Now, with Elena reunited with her daughter, he had discovered a new kind of joy, a family built not just on blood, but on love, patience, and shared experiences. Elena, too, found her life transformed. She had spent